Looks like the core, the inside might be a little better. Yeah, that's a little better. Alright, somebody tell me what this thing is. It's about as long as my finger, actually. My big finger. Probably 4 inches. It's got some stingers on the end, some pincers up on its teeth. It lives in the water, what is it? Beautiful spot to be. Hot. It's hot though. One of the reasons that I'm taking my time making some feather sticks is because I'm not using a fire steel today. Today I'm going to use an actual flint, piece of flint, and just the back of this 01 knife. This is that Enzo Trapper that I first talked about in a review, or kind of a introduction video a while ago. And I thought instead of using the old fire steel, which is really not old, it's not even old technology, that's pretty new. That's one thing that really frustrates me online is people will be talking about flint and steel, and they think that flint is a fire steel. A fire steel is a modern creation. It's not anything old. That's a relatively new creation. But flint and steel is an actual piece of flint or chert, or like what I've got here. I can't remember if this is quartz or mica, but a very nice sharp rock that has a particular structure and hardness to it, and it'll strike on the steel, and when it oxidizes the carbon inside the knife, it produces a nice spark. And you can't just start materials the way that you can with a flint and steel, or a fire steel with a flint and steel. They are different. And so one of the things that people usually do is they create punky wood, which is what I'm going to do today. I'm going to start a fire and make some punky wood, but I'm going to use char cloth to get there. And so char cloth is just burnt up cotton that's you know, you make it in a tin. It's not really burnt in the fire, but charred up cloth anyways. And in order to ignite, usually people use a piece of birch bark or something like that. Something good and flammable, grass. I don't have any of that around me right now. In fact, the conditions are almost tropical. Everything was pretty much wet when I came down to this area. Mosquitoes were insane. Deer flies were bad, but they've gotten better because I'm wearing about 10 pounds of DEET. And so I'm going to just use wood curls and sweat, apparently. There's a nice curly stick. You get about 10 of those together. When you get your char cloth, you put it in the midst of that and you blow into it just like any other tinder bundle, and it goes into flame. Alright, so I'm lucky. I hunted around and found a little bit of birch bark. I broke apart a nice quartz or mica or something. I don't even know what it is. Can't remember. And I've got a little bit of char cloth. Got a knife. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plant this char cloth, actually. I think I'll plant it with the knife like that. Good stab. I'm use this piece of rock that I found. Seems like it's got some good sharp edges. And if I get that sucker going, I'll try to throw it into this birch bark and see if she'll go. It's a pretty thick piece of birch bark, so I'm not 100% sure it's going to work, but it might. See if I can thin it out a little bit. Yeah, it's pretty thick. We'll just see what happens. There she goes. Knife into the sheath. Get your char cloth in there. It's already getting hot. There she goes, on fire. I think I'll have it right here. Get all my feather sticks together. Ow, hot. That should help with the bugs anyways. And on the coals is how I'm going to make my next project. All right, so again, all I used to get that going was a little bit of char cloth from my kit, which I don't know where I put it. Ah, right next to me. So again, all I used to make that fire was some char cloth that I had previously made, a carbon steel knife, in this case an 01 piece I'm very fond of, and a little bit of quartz or mica. I guess it might be quartz. I'm really not great with rock identification at all. Pretty much the basic rocks. You know, this piece is so hard. It's an incredibly hard piece of wood. It took a lot to get it broken, but when it breaks, it'll have almost these smooth edges inside, just like flint does, and then really sharp corners where it's broken off. And those sharp corners, I didn't realize it when I was setting that. I went back and watched, and actually the first hit was a spark. If it was dark out tonight, I would, well, if it was tonight, let's say that, I would show you that actually every hit on this knife, I'm sending a shower of sparks with, and there's part of the rock. I'm sending a shower of sparks. It's awesome. And when it breaks off like that, and a little bit of the stone relieves itself, it gives a new sharp edge, and that sharp edge throws sparks even better. So I'm really happy with this Enzo Trapper in 01. 1095 also works. I've used let's see, a Condor primitive camp knife in 1095. That's some 1095 I found to work. There's plenty of 1095 blades that I have found don't work, but I think most of the ones from Pathfinder Knife Shop, if you ever check that place out, they'll have it. The next thing, I suppose you want to have, if you're going to do this the right way, is a fire tin. You know, when I was preparing for this video, oh my gosh, it's hot. When I was preparing for this video, I checked my fire tin and I didn't put it back in. What a lesson that is. So I can't make it right now in a very easy way. One way you could make it, in theory, is with tin foil, or I have a wrapper from a granola bar I had that is lined with foil. These don't seem to burn up quite as quick. I suppose you could, if you got this nice and tight, maybe I'll give it a try. We'll just see what happens. I'm going to use this Nature Valley protein wrapper. I'm going to put some punky wood in there, wrap it up. I'll put it on the coals, and we'll just see how it does. If I can make punky wood out of that, then I've learned something today. So maybe it won't be a waste after all. But pretty happy with this rock I found. Nice thin slices like that are easier to carry rather than a big rock. You know, some of those rocks are a little too big and fat. I like the nice slicey ones. When this breaks off, it makes a nice sharp edge. So, big fish jumped out of the water. That was cool. All right, let's see what happens. Well, that was an immediate no. The foil from the wrapper was just way too thin, and it dissolved into different parts and lit the wood on fire. So my original plan for this video didn't work out very well. I had a couple weather differences that really kind of ruined it. So I think what I'll do today is I'll just go ahead and give my final 2 cents on my own knife. So this is an Enzo Trapper 95 that did not come with scales. It's just an 01 blank with a Scandi edge. And the Trapper is a fantastic blade. I have another Trapper in M2 steel. And M2 is really interesting. It's a great, technically it's a carbon steel with a lot of, I think, chromium in it. It ends up being very close to a stainless, but it's still carbon. It's very, very good on the molecular level for holding an edge for carbon steel. It's very impressive. They don't really make that anymore because it was eclipsed by M4 steel. So if you're familiar with M4, M2 was the first, and it's not that different than M4. M4 is just a step up, maybe in toughness, I believe. But this is 01, and 01's an old knife steel. You know, there's plenty of blades in 01, lots of files in 01. And you saw in the video previous, or in the material previous, that 01 sends a nice spark. It's a great piece of steel for bushcraft in general because it's fairly easy to sharpen. I've seen some people put it at mid-tier hardness for sharpening. I actually disagree. I've sharpened 1095 and 01 super easily. A lot of times I'll take a broken work sharp belt, if you have a work sharp, I'll put it to a flat piece of wood and nail it down at the corners, and I'll just run this over the belt once. Hone the edge, and it's incredibly sharp. I don't know if it's just because of Enzo's angle. They do have a little bit higher grind angle. Not much, but a little bit higher grind angle. It could be part of that, but I don't know. I just find 1095 and 01 to sharpen really easy. In this blank that I got, when this is a blank sold, I did notice a difference. In the pre-mades that they sell, the grind right about here, it seems different. Unless there's been a change in the knife design itself, which I'm not aware of. This grind up here, there was, I would say, a higher grind on the pre-made, and this has a lower grind on the blank kit. I don't have a problem with it. I think it's still very, very good. I can't even see a way that it hinders function except for the fact that it is a little thicker, a little faster. In fact, this one had a better grind as far as evenness goes than my original. I want to say now that I think about it, I think even the height of the grind might have been a little different. Perhaps that's because of steel difference. I don't know if they grind them differently depending on the steel. That could have something to do with it. Just finding out which angles work best. And of course on that original, the handle scales are just too thin. I would also say that they're not broad enough, that the knife needs to be more broad, but maybe it's just a knife that's designed for people's smaller hands. One of the things though is I really liked the knife. It performed well, it was the right size, the price was right at the time I bought them. They're actually more expensive now. I don't know why, but I had a great price. Oh, some eagles coming in, catching a fish. Well, that's cool. Wasn't even scared of me talking. Wow. Sorry, anyways. So with this knife, what I wanted to do is I had some black walnut laying around, I usually make spoons out of, and I wanted to make some handle scales out of that black walnut just to see how it would weather, and I wanted them thick, and this is a thick handled knife. If you can tell, there's only a slight contour, and obviously I follow the contour of the actual steel blank, And to make up for the fact that it was a little thin, especially in the first finger position, right where your first finger sits, the thing that I did was to leave it extremely thick up here as far as the scales go, very thick. Same broadness, but I also brought it up closer to the blade. There's usually a little hook right about here, and the scales on the original stop about here. So there's a gap between your finger and the blade. I like my knife, just like a lot of the old Moras used to be, I like my knife to come, the edge to come right back to my finger, right there. I'm not afraid of it slipping. I don't do a whole lot of stabbing things, and I've never ever cut myself in that way. And so with the thickness of this knife and my relatively large size hands, you know, XL size hands, this thing is enormous, and I don't have an issue of my fingers running into themselves, or into the palm rather, like I do with most knives I ever pick up. I'm really happy with this knife. The swell in the middle is just a little bit rounded out on the belly, a little bit more rounded down here. And then for my pinky, there is kind of a spot, a position you could say, with a flare on the tail. And that's about as much as I cared to do. I didn't need the lanyard hole, so I just covered that up. I ran some pins through it, and the pins actually warped a little bit as I was pushing them through. There's just like a regular old soft stainless. And so I had, if you can see that at all, I had a little bit of an issue. They're not exactly perfect, but I put glue in here as well as some epoxy, and this thing is rock solid. Even if it doesn't look perfect, it functions exactly how I want it to. I'm really a big fan of this blade. One of the things that I like about it is it doesn't give me hand fatigue like most other knives do, you know, in the first 5-10 minutes, because the handles are so large and the blade is so sharp. This was a hard piece of wood. So about 3 passes to get through a thumb-sized piece of wood. That was actually relatively hard. And it's just really not hard for me to get there because my thumb can get up here. I can get really high on the blade. I can get the leverage. If you're out here and you're pushing into wood, if you have a really sharp knife, you maybe don't notice sometimes, but that is more resistance to get more crank on your wrist because it's further from the point of your power, which is right in here. And so the way that I've done this blade with being able to choke up on it so close, I can get a lot of power in there, and I open my hand and it's not red. It doesn't hurt. It actually feels quite comfortable. It's like a glorified broom handle for sure. I really think this is the way to go. If you're gonna make a knife, or you're looking for a bushcraft knife, a lot of the pre-mades, I don't know, the handles are just kind of generic, they're kind of boring. Most of them don't fit well. And with a knife like this, or a kit like this rather, you can just make exactly what you want. Now, usually the thing that people don't know what to do about is the sheath. And so I'll talk about that. I have a Pathfinder's sheath here. So this is one of their really generic black but good quality leather sheaths. And I haven't wet formed it or anything like that. I don't plan to actually. But this sheath did not come with a fire steel loop. So I just got some, wax coated cordage and laced that through, put on my own fire steel loop because I do like to use a fire steel sometimes. I should probably comment on this real quick. One thing I noticed is the Chinese fire steels, those soft fire steels, they don't tend to work really nice with this blade. I don't know why. It's got a very sharp spine. It's always dung up from, you know, hitting rocks with it. But the actual light my fire, it almost skips across it. Like, I don't know if it's just so hard. I don't know what it is, but it kind of skips across it, but it does send better sparks. So I went with a light my fire, actual Swedish fire steel for that. And I do clean it off pretty often. It is 01 steel. I haven't had a whole bunch of rust issues, but I'm not near salt water. I maintain my blades pretty good too. Anyways, back to the sheath. That was one of the things I was a little worried about, was finding a knife sheath that actually was big enough to fit this huge handle I have. And I knew Dave Canterbury likes a good handle on his knife too, and a lot of the customs that they have are relatively large handles. Not as big as this, but relatively large. And this sheath was one of the only sheaths that could fit for them, and was also short enough where I didn't have a bunch of extra hanging off. This is just about perfect for this knife. And I think I paid, I want to say $24 for this, which is a steal. I really think that's a great deal for leather nowadays. You can pay a lot more, you could do a lot worse. And to attach it, I just use a climbing carabiner. It really doubles as a useful tool with a little bit of paracord. When I'm climbing up in the hills, you can't see behind me, but it's fairly vertical. I have to climb with my hands, and when I'm coming down, I sometimes have to rappel a little bit, and so I'll just use a little bit of paracord, and there's no full weight on the paracord. It's not super risky, just enough to get me down like a little, 5 or 6 foot drop or something in that steep angle. So I use a carabiner. This one's tested for 22 kilonewtons vertically, 7 kilonewtons against the gate, which is way more than I ever use them for. But it works as a nice little package. I prefer Kydex 100% of the time, but I wasn't going to have this Kydex and I wasn't going to make my own. I've kind of backed off of that a little bit. And the leather it's a pretty good option. It's practically disposable to me. If this falls apart, I'll get a new one in a few years. But this whole package, if you put the knife together, I got 50 bucks into that. Probably $1 into the pins. So 51, $24 into, the sheath. So all together, we're looking at under $100 for a fire steel, a really high quality custom 01 knife, a sheath, and a carabiner. So compared to the original Enzo that I got, that was 90 something, I think, in M2 steel, I paid less and I got more for it. So this is why I would convince you, stop buying pre-made customs. There's plenty that I like. In fact, there's one sitting right here. Just as a comparison, this is the Morikans bowl. I have a video on this, go check that out. And on the Morikans bowl, the grippy material is awesome. I love the feeling of the handle for a little bit, but after about 10 minutes of working with the knife, I realized it's very thin. Not the blade steel, I love that. But it's just not very broad, and the scales, if you want to call it that, the handle, it's just very thin. It would work well for about my wife's size hands. She likes this knife, she'll use it. But for my hands, if I actually reverse the knife, if the blade was coming out the end, that would be better. So they've got a flare at the end, and so these pre-mades, again, this is a cheap knife. This is like a $29 knife with a great sheath. I prefer this for a lot of different things, especially if you're working with fish, or you just need a stainless knife. So if something's gonna get junked up, it's this one. I've batoned with it, I've beat it up. This stainless kind of steel is relatively easy to sharpen in the field. It's like a 12C CR or whatever it is. Can't remember what the title is of that steel. A pretty decent outdoors kind of steel that you can touch up with a stone. But again, when I'm kind of valuing the one tool option, if I just want to bring one knife with me, which never happens, by the way, there's always a folding knife in my pocket. So we'll say 2 knives. If I just bring 2 knives out in the woods with me and I want to carve for a while, or I want to do a little fishing and, just an all-arounder, this is pretty good. It doesn't do everything that this does exactly as good. It's not as rust resistant, and it's a little thicker, but overall, I kind of have to lean towards this. I'm going to keep my Morikans bowl, but this is the knife that seems to come with me now, and I don't have any reason to switch from it. It's so much more versatile. I can use it with fire steel, I can use it with rocks, I can make char cloth with it. It carves really, really well compared to all the other knives I have. It's very durable. It's pretty stout compared to the Kans bowl, but it batons better because of that. And the handle is just night and day different, from all the other knives I own. So I guess that's my rant. That's the end of it. I think you guys should go buy one. That's the Enzo Trapper 95. They have lots of kits out. Now they have a Nessmuk kit. They have their little tiny knives. They have kits for those, and they're extremely reasonably priced. Like I said, I paid 55 bucks for this one. I think it was Ben's Backwoods, possibly. Go check out that site, or on eBay, or Dave Canterbury sometimes has some. The Knife Connection might have some. I don't know, you'll have to hunt around a little bit, but I think these kits are extremely worth it. Thanks guys for tuning into my channel, checking in on a failed day. I'll come back, I'll do another video showing you some punky wood and my char tin with natural materials. That'll be fun. Thanks guys. See through the water pretty good.
find them.